What's up, everyone? Check out who I got in the room today. Oh, it's the Messenger Movement Podcast, and Rachel Rector's in the house. I was anticipating all these flybys and fun things going on, so we're going to do it ourselves. You guys, you are in the house with Fit Press's newest author, Rachel Rector. You might have seen all of these other authors come through. She is a fellow author in the co-hosted, co-experienced, co-written More Than Enough book, but today we are highlighting her individual solo story, one of the first and one of the many, because there's more to come. She is absolutely a writer in and of itself, and I am so excited for you guys to hear about it because it's been behind the scenes for so long. So behind hidden doors is no longer hidden. Rachel, we're so excited to unpack it with you today on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It has been a labor of love and tears, but it is well needed in the world today.
Well, I think that there's so much to that statement alone, right? It's the knowing that it's a lot of people are going to say, oh my gosh, you wrote a book. This is amazing. And you're like, yeah, I could have done without the story. Like the story would have been nice that it wasn't my story. It wasn't my child's story. It wasn't something I was going to have to walk through. And yet here you are, and you're utilizing it to glorify God in such a beautiful way. So let's talk about what Behind Hidden Doors is about. Let's get into the meat and potatoes and even perhaps some of those tears.
Yeah, so it is a easy to follow guidebook and resource for caregivers, parents, guardians, counselors, teachers, anybody that has a child in their life that they want to be proactive before the bullying could happen to they're in the midst of it all. And so I, as a mama, got to walk through the journey of not one, but two of my children being bullied. And this book is kind of prefaced around a lot of the examples of her story as a bullying survivor and my story as a bullying survivor's parent. And so I walked through the different steps from trying to figure out what's going on in your child's life to understanding what way they are being bullied to getting through on the other side. And so I did not have that. I had to do a lot of research. I had to do a lot of digging and advocacy myself. And so this is to bless the people that come after us so that they don't have to walk through so much heartache and they have a community backing them and alongside them.
Well, and there's so much biblical gifting to that, right? It's like the knowing that we're meant to help those behind us, those who are going to walk through this, who already have perhaps, or literally currently are. And I love that it's a tool for so many and so many different facets of that. You got so creative in the book writing process on trying to figure out, how am I going to lay this out so that so many people can have access to it, but also so that you honor your daughter through the process and you honor those who may not want to be necessarily front focused on the bullying experience. A lot of people don't want to raise their hand to that story, just like I said, but this is where they're at. Can you talk us through what was that journey like as you were trying to decide, what do I include? What do I not include? I think there's a lot of authors on the other side that are like, I have a story, I want to share it, but it's not fully my story. And you've done such an honorable job for everybody involved to do that.
Thank you for those words. Yeah, it was a lot of wrestling, a reminder constantly from the Lord that this is not meant to be our story shared. It's meant to be a tool in the hands of the reader. And so our story is intertwined in it, but it is not our story. It's not Madison's story. It's not Rachel's story. It is the story of the reader and wanting them to feel seen, heard, and valued, because as the child that will be the survivor on the other side, they don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. They definitely don't feel valued. And then the parent, in the book, it talks about it. I have a chapter solely for the adult advocate. You feel unseen, you feel unheard, and people abandon you when you start advocating for a child. And so that was my preface, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't an autobiography. If my daughter down the road wants to make a sequel, that is hers to hold in the hands of the beholder. But we do have inside of there the afterword, where she gets to share just little nuggets that she wants to share right now, that maybe someday will be birthed into a book.
I love it so much because it's like bringing out that opportunity for them to testify, for them to share, and also for them to recognize that this is not, she's not a victim.
Mhm.
In the season, that's where she was, but she's an overcomer. And I just love that she's bold enough and brave enough. So if you're listening to this podcast, you have an opportunity to come to any of the book launch experiences that Rachel is putting together. And the coolest part is we had zero idea when we were going to bring this to life this month that it's Anti-Bullying Awareness Month. And so there's already advocacy happening, and Rachel's book gets to be in the forefront of that. And so I want to process this too, Rachel, from the perspective of, as you wrote it, one of the creative lenses that you took was understanding you had all these people that you wanted to talk to and through and for, and you did it through different doors, which is kind of where the name of the title, like Behind Hidden Doors, which is not anything what you thought it was initially going to be titled. So talk to us through, like, how did God reveal each of these things to you, and what was that journey like to say, okay, now I understand how it's going to be pieced together, and then to go into the writing process?
Yeah, so I attended the author retreat through Fit and Faith Press. And really, I had no idea. I just thought it was going to be me talking about the counselor and me talking about the teacher and those kinds of things. And it was actually in that cohort that one of the other authors said, have you ever thought about this? Like, you're shedding light into things that are hidden under the rug in school, in home, in the workplace. And it just kind of out of that birthed everything. The hardest one was my favorite chapter, goes into the inner mind of the child. And I thought, okay, where do I fit that in? How is that a door? So trying to figure out how to land in that, because we're going inside of the child. Ultimately, you're not walking into, per se, a room when we think of rooms. And so just trying to come to that, and basically it just was my reminder of the places that I was when I walked at those pieces of the journey. And so it was the primary bedroom, the child's bedroom, the bathroom, the school. That was the other piece that I had to figure out, because as the editor was going through it, I said, well, we can't really just say a home, because you're going to school, you're going to the admin's office, you're going to the counseling office. And so making sure we kept it to doors and places you are going instead of just a home, because bullying happens all over.
Yeah. And let's speak to that, because I know that there's a lot of people who might not have either children that are this kind of age bracket that you're really speaking into, which at the time was elementary. Obviously, middle and high school, they experience this as well. What about other lenses of bullying? Have you processed through how other people are like, yes, I raise my hand to this, because I can think of adults who get bullied?
Yeah, so there is multiple chapters that are not just for children. Obviously, yes, I speak to the child and to the parent or the caregiver, but there's one on just trying to get the story out, right? Because we don't, counselors say and professionals say, you don't want to relive trauma after trauma. That's not healthy for anyone. That's not healthy for the person sharing. And so really trying to get it out. So I talk about different avenues of getting it out, so that you only have to share it one time. Another one is how to choose a counselor. Counseling is not just for children. It's taboo. I wish it was not, but it is taboo. And so it really can take an adult through, how do I choose a counselor that's right for me, and what are the benefits of it? Also, I go through coping strategies. Everybody needs those. And then on the other side, I talk about ways to heal. And so it's trying to get inside and figuring out what that lie is. Sometimes it's surface level and you know what it is. Other times it can be from your childhood and you have to dig it out to try to excavate it out so that you can put back in the lies. And so I have a 5-step process that I walk people through. So yeah, it's for anybody.
It's so good. It really is. And I'm just so proud of you for not just the experience and being able to talk about the experience, which is ultimately what a messenger is meant to do, but really moving people into this place of freedom. One of my favorite things when we were first even talking about the book before it got into full written format, you were discussing your lens on the, how do you call it? The bullier, like who's the person
Mhm.
who is the bully. And I just remember always being like, man, you have such a mama's heart. You have such a caregiver's heart, because you never let anybody fall prey to victimhood. And I mentioned that, about your daughter and her being on the receiving end of said bullying experience, but you were such an advocate also for the trauma that that child could have been going through, or the anger that that person could have been holding on to. And so it's not a it's not putting one up against another. It's actually just allowing them to both find freedom. Can you talk about, like, obviously that's just your heart, it's who you are, but where does that kind of safety or protection or element of concern come from in order for them to also find freedom?
Yeah, so I share this in the book that I'm not only a parent who has walked through this, I taught for most of 14 years. And so I was the advocate as the teacher in the many classrooms that I got to be a part of. And I learned over time that, as it goes into the book, I won't go into all of it. There are so many reasons why a child chooses to bully. But ultimately, it comes down to one of two things: they don't feel like they belong, or they don't feel significant. And so a common thing is to just say, okay, we'll just expel them or just suspend them and let them move on to another school, let somebody else deal with it. And that's not it. That you're not getting to the heart of it. When
Yeah.
we go into detail in the book, that behavior, there's an iceberg. We see the top, but there's so much underlying that we don't see, that we don't know until we excavate that out for them. And so inside of the book, I challenge whoever's reading it to remember, I talk about the different types of bullies and the different type of bullying, but that's also a title and that's a label, and we don't want that in our lives. So when we
Good.
call somebody, a child, an adult, a bully, we are breathing life into that title. And that's the last thing we want to do. We want resolution. We want resolve for everybody. And so that's my biggest thing was, inside of it, my editor made sure with me that when we used bully, it was just because there was no other word to use, so that you could differentiate who we're talking about. And we talk about that in the intro.
Good.
Um, but deep down, they're a human also. And so
Right.
we don't want to breathe that over them. Um, we know as adults, there are things even from our childhood that we're trying to release when it comes to labels and when it comes to titles. And that's the last thing we want on a child, is to walk around with that label, with that sticker on their forehead saying, I am a bully, because they're
Yeah.
not. That's
Yeah.
just their behavior acting in that way.
Right. I'm thinking about a couple of examples with my son who, I mean, as little as 4 years old, you guys. He was in a Chick-fil-A, playhouse area. It was one of the days that we were out of school, and I'm just hanging out with him and my daughter, and I'm eating while they're inside playing in the little playhouse, and he comes out with these big crocodile tears, and he had and still has long hair. And he's persists to tell me that they keep calling me a girl. And that always really agitated me, because I'm like, well, there's one solution to sharing why you're not a girl. And it's very apparent and easy to talk about. But I was like, well, that's not very kind. And I was like, would you like me to come in and help you? And I think that's an area of advocacy that can sometimes, as parents, we don't want to get in the way. We want them to try and figure it out themselves. But when a child is brought to tears over something that consistently is happening, I know my son, he would easily try to rectify the situation on his own, maybe even taking it into his hands physically where he shouldn't. And so I was so proud of him in that moment, one, for showing his emotions, and two, for coming to get help. And that's when he was 4 years old. And fast forward, there was a couple other times in his elementary schooling where similar things were happening, whether it was about his hair, whether it was about his athleticism, which is weird. Yeah, that's the opposite of what most people are bullied for. And then we always went back to what those children were dealing with. And you're so right that the iceberg element, that same example that can be used for so many tactics, is so palpable here. And I would have to explain that to them, because they didn't understand why these words were coming this way, like a fiery bullet, right? And isn't that like how the enemy is? It's like the exact same thing. And that's a principality, that's a spiritual realm. Can you unpack like where that kind of lays biblically, and how we all the time are on the receiving end of the ultimate bully, who is the enemy? I'm okay with calling Satan a big fat bully, because that's what he is.
Yeah, well, and I talk about in the book that there's a difference between rude, mean, and bullying, and I feel like
Mm,
that is something that so many of us, even in the teaching field, we don't know the difference. And so when we're
good.
trying to advocate, we're using the wrong words. So somebody that's rude is inadvertently saying something or doing something to hurt. They're not intentionally doing it. For example, probably when they were 4, when your child was 4, it was probably rude. They just didn't
Mm,
know better because they didn't know different.
right.
However, mean is when they do it purposely. They're doing
Mhm,
it to hurt or to cause harm. And they are doing it once or twice, but it's not consistent and it doesn't keep up. So a difference in rude is like thinking somebody is a girl instead of a boy. Mean, on the other hand, is they're doing it to make them feel bad.
yeah.
So maybe, for example, they know that somebody doesn't like something, and so they say that to them. Whereas bullying has to fit 4 categories. It's purposeful action. It's malicious intent. So they're trying to hurt, embarrass,
Mhm,
humiliate,
mhm,
or intimidate, or all of the above. It's repetition. It happens more than one time. What is confusing is it doesn't have to be the same behavior. So
right.
one time it might be that they are being cheeky with their words and they're saying something verbally, and then it leads up to physical bullying. And then always there is an imbalance between the person that is choosing to bully and the child that's being bullied. And so they have to have all of those to fit that. If not, it's mean or rude. Not to say it's not hurtful, but it's not intentional or it's not consistent or all of those things. And so ultimately, that's what the enemy does. He tries to distract. He tries to make us not feel significant. He tries to make us feel not belong in whatever format that looks like.
Mm,
So for some people, that might have to be physical, and physical bullying is happening. Other times, the one that a lot of people don't see is the more psychological bullying, because they're doing it
mm,
with their eyes. So it's attached
mm,
sometimes to nonverbal bullying, and the teacher doesn't see it or the boss doesn't hear it. And so
mhm,
it's those tactics, like the devil is. He tries to come to kill, steal, or destroy. And sometimes he can be so sneaky, just
yeah.
like some of the bullying. It seems really sneaky, but it is purposeful and it is malicious and it is continuing to repeat, and it is an imbalance.
Jeez, those are 4 amazing things for us to reference, and I definitely experienced them myself when I was younger growing up, and I talk about that in the introduction where I was specifically bullied. Definitely, they were rude at first, and then they were mean, and then I'm like, "This is blatant bullying," but we really didn't talk about it then, and in some of the scenarios that you're experiencing or you're sharing about here with the response, like mine was with my bus driver. Well, the bullying wasn't happening with my bus driver, but that was the adult that was on site that I could confide in. And how can they possibly see or hear when they're doing something a little bit more important, like driving a bus and trying to keep everyone safe? And I just remember constantly having this conversation, constantly being in a state of fear, constantly trying to create protection around me. And I was so young, I had no idea even what I was doing. I just knew that I felt wildly unsafe and I
Mhm.
really felt victimized. I did not like what they were saying, what they were looking at, all of those elements. But one of the things that you're talking about here, Rachel, that I think is really vital for people who are listening, because as mentioned, they might not be in this state with their children, is workplace bullying. And I also, and it was years older than me. And I was so confused, like, why is this person out to get me? And it was consistently happening. So I don't know if you have any specific examples that you can think about in that work life experience, or if there's something that you haven't yet pinpointed that you think would be supportive for those listening in that regard. But I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, messengers, leaders in the room that have people all of the same, kind of era, same age, same place. What does that look like from a leadership lens?
Yeah, so actually, I don't share this in the book, but I was actually bullied as a teacher. I had a
Mm,
veteran teacher that thought she knew better, thought she could control me, and she did. And she did it in front of my students. I taught kindergarten at the time, and I remember being like, "No, I am not okay with this." 22 4, 5, 6-year-olds just witnessed this. This is their teacher who they find safety in. And so I
Right.
remember walking to the principal's office, and it was a hard walk, but walking in there and sharing. And I think that's the piece that is so hard in the workplace is, ooh, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes. Ooh, I
Yep.
don't want them to look at me differently. I don't want them to treat me differently. And I think in that realm, um, unlike children, they 10 times know better and they know what they're doing. And it is purposeful. Maybe they want to get above you and they want that
Mhm.
title that you both are running for. Or a lot of times they just see you as powerful in whatever realm that is. And so they want to take you down however many pegs so that they feel level ground with you. And it's not okay. And most workplaces should have something intact. It's just not. That's the thing, is it's not shared about. It's not talked
Yeah.
about very often.
Yeah.
Usually you have to go back to your contract or something like that. And so it's making sure that you don't give. This is what I had to teach my daughter. You don't allow them to feel like they have that power. So a lot of times they want to see you cry. They want to see
Mhm.
you get mad. So if you're able to just crack a joke and throw them off like, wow, that didn't land, a lot of times they'll leave you alone unless they're just that constant person that they
Yeah.
don't care and they're going to go after you for whatever reason. And so, yeah, it is making sure that your workplace has that intact, because the one of the people that endorsed this book, she was bullied.
Yeah.
And that's a piece of her testimony. And so there are things that she wished would have went differently in how it was handled, and things that did go well. And so it's those pieces, making sure that you're in that team atmosphere, and it sometimes is dog eat dog,
Yeah.
and you have to be careful and you have to watch out for yourself, as sad as that is.
Well, I'm thinking of so many elements. You mentioned that imbalance of title or power, and I think this is where spirit-filled leaders and spirit-filled people can often get that backlash, and why sometimes Christians try to remain, keeping that church and state kind of secular sacred divide. They're like, I don't want to talk about that in here because it might make me appear weak, especially as men. And I see this and talk to guys about this often. But I think that there is something, obviously, we know the power and authority in which we walk, that regardless of us speaking in that way, or regardless of people ever knowing that we are daughters or sons of the king, it's a target on our back in
Mhm.
some regard. And so you being, substantially younger than this teacher, me being substantially younger than this manager, like, she wasn't vying for my title. I was literally way younger than she was, but it's a threat. And so processing this and also seeing what happened, and I'll name drop here because Lindsay's amazing. Lindsay Graham is one of the endorsers for the book, The Patriot Barbie, if you want to look her up on social. She had a mass media bullying experience when COVID transpired. And you guys have to look at her story. It's amazing. And it's ultimately talking about what happened when she started saying, hey, as an entrepreneur during COVID, I am opening my doors. This is the livelihood for my family. She was a hairdresser at the time. And so she opened her doors, and man, this was targeting from, government. So this is
Mhm.
a huge imbalance. And it was wild to see what has transpired on the other side of that, because she vocalized. And so I ultimately think, for anyone listening, the one thing that you said, Rachel, which is like, hey, let the cat out of the bag. Hey,
Mhm.
don't remain in silence. Go forth, take that hard walk. And I think your example of how you felt like, I don't want to be left out, I don't want this person to treat me different, is the exact same way that my son would come to me. Don't tell the teacher because I don't want them to think that I told on them and this happened and
Mhm.
this happened. And I'm like, yeah, buddy, but like, at the end of the day, mama's going to tell, because this is what we do and we know better as adults. And so I encourage people who are listening, who are thinking as a parent or as a colleague, maybe you've witnessed this and you're not necessarily the person in the receiving or the bullying lens. But I think we should be witnessing to workplace bullying and school bullying and play yard bullying, whatever that is, as often as we possibly can.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. And the big piece that in the workplace especially that gets forgotten is when you agree upon something verbal, it's only
Mhm.
between you and the person that you're talking to. And so documentation is the biggest thing, and we talk about
Good.
that in the book. You need to document everything. And some of the times you need to send that email even if you've already talked in person, you already had a meeting, you need some kind of written documentation to fall back on, because what we experienced is our child was in a private school, and so talk about church and state and trying to but they spoke about grace and giving grace and grace and grace. Well, my child was in upper elementary, and so this child knew better. It hit all four things constantly when she was doing this. And so just making sure that we had that to go back to, oh, remember in this email or in this meeting, you don't always have to send an email, but making sure you keep track of it, because honestly, humans do forget, but then
Yeah.
sometimes there's a lot of that sweeping under the rug. And so
Right.
just making sure that you cover all your bases so that you are safe in everything that you say.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Rachel, because I do want people to be aware if you are in a space where you're like, well, I can't talk about my faith here. I can't utilize this as a resource, or I can't bring this to my boss or our counselors or our teacher or my school's principal, any of those things. This is a faith founded book, but it is not a faith forward book. The language that's used is very platonic for anyone to be able to receive. But the fact that you mentioned essentially bullying in our churches, right? Bullying amongst other brothers and sisters, like that is a real thing. And I just think it's another layer to where this mission could come into play when it comes to these rich conversations. But I don't want anyone to think while we're speaking through the faith of what it is founded on, that this can't be a tool that's used in a non-faith oriented space, because 100% can. And Rachel is very intentional with that. Actually, I think there was some wrestling that potentially happened in that regard. Rachel, do you want to share with fellow authors who are listening, thinking about it from that lens of what should I share? What should I not? And my faith is the most important thing to me. And at the same time, I want this to be a tool for so many people.
Yeah, so the central theme that we kept was light, because we all, as believers, we know where that light's coming from and where that truth is coming from. And so I wanted to keep that. We had a different cover, and I said, no, there needs to be light on this cover. That is what I want. I want the darkness to reside. And I actually have a reel that has went out, and it talks about darkness can't overtake darkness. It's the light that prevails. And so I wanted to keep that piece in there. However, I taught in the public school for lots of years. And I know that if it was scripture after scripture after scripture, they could not even use that in training
Right.
for their teachers. And so I did not want that to be a hindering block to advocate and move forward in the school system. Also, I had a counselor that endorsed it, and I want her to be able to share it with others so that it can be a resource that they hand to their client. Because yes, they have those sessions, but you don't have a session every day. And so they can say, hey, refer to chapter 2 today. We'll come back next week. I wanted to be able to do that. And then ultimately, I went to teaching school. I got my bachelor's. I got my master's, and I never once had any formal training on bullying. And so I want it to be a resource for them so that they don't get trained like me of, oh, well, just make sure bullying doesn't happen in your classroom. That's all I had. And I
Yeah.
went to multiple colleges and universities to get my multiple degrees. And so I wanted it to be a piece and a light. However, we do have inside of there's a process of replacing the lie with truth. And we go through it, identifying the lie, recalling where that came from, where it was spoke over, recognizing it, replacing it with truth. And I share in there that if they don't have the same beliefs, they don't have to keep reading that chapter. But then I go a level deeper, and not only just saying I am unique, but they are going deeper in speaking and reading and writing the scripture that matches it. Because we can't just say affirmations. We can say affirmations so we're blue in the face, but we cannot believe it if truth is not placed inside to replace that lie. And so that's a piece. And I have affirmation cards that go with that. And so that can still be used in the secular realm, but then in faith believing, even counseling offices, they can hand them those affirmation scripture cards. And that can be something they put on their mirror to practice daily until it does replace that lie. Because sometimes even in a 5-year-old, that lie can be so ingrained in their mind and their heart that they start believing it because they think it's truth, because it's been said over them so much.
Totally, totally. You guys can obviously hear that she has such passion behind the concept, but also such wisdom. And she's bringing it from so many multiple angles. And even as you're sharing that, Rachel, I'm thinking our co-authored book, More Than Enough, and the replacing of the lies and the labels that we've been talking about with that endeavor. And so this is something that I think actually, as you're talking more about it, even the person who might be the advocate, even the parent, even the teacher might not have done some of this deep work, because as both of us just experienced and shared with you, we've been on that receiving end before. And perhaps if someone's listening that they too have been the one who's been the bully, like, there is grace, and we don't want to dismiss that grace is not an element of this, but ultimately what she's speaking to is that there is a shifted identity that is available to us. And that shifted identity resolves and is found in the light, which is our truest understanding of who we are as daughters and sons. And so I'm just excited. I'm so excited for this to come out. I'm so excited for the journey that you've been on as an author. You guys, she also has her own podcast called the Freedom Diaries Podcast. So you have to go listen. If you think that the way in which she's sharing here is profound, the first time I ever saw Rachel on stage, I felt like I just went to like a theatrical experience, and it was just in awe, because she's not the one who you would imagine would take center stage with such elegance, but also such power. Talk about power. I mean, it was unbelievable. So you're going to enjoy getting to know her through her social media, through her podcast, through this book, and the many other books to come. And I'm just so excited to be an advocate for you, Rachel, and what God has put inside of you, because I know that there are so many other stories that are yet to be revealed that are going to come to light. And so we're grateful to be your publisher. Is there any final words you want to share about the book that we haven't shared? Obviously, where is it available? Say the full name again so that we can use this and get people to purchase and have this as a tool for them moving forward.
Yeah, so it is called Behind the Hidden Doors: Bullying, Hope, and Identity. And you can find it on Amazon and eventually down the road, more platforms. But yes, my ultimate thing is, I don't want you to stay. If you are the advocate, if you are the person being bullied, if you, whatever realm that is, I don't want you to stay stuck as the teacher that feels like, man, that's so sticky right now. I know what I need to do, but I can't do. I want you to remember to take your stance, and that when you take your stance, people aren't always going to follow suit because you're being different. But there are always people on the other side that are waiting for that person that's going to be strong to take the first stance, so that they can follow suit and they can have freedom, because there is freedom on the other side. I specifically never say victim, bullying victim inside of the book, because as we taught our daughter, you are not a victim. You are a survivor. This is a piece of your testimony. This is a piece of the light that you have to share to the world. And so I want whoever is listening right now, if you're being bullied or you're the advocate, know that you are not a victim. You are a survivor, and you're meant to have healing on the other side. Ultimate healing will not come till heaven, but there are steps that you can take starting this very minute to start moving towards healing, because nobody ever wants to stay a victim. It's icky. It doesn't feel good. And you are worthy. You are seen. You are loved. And you are appreciated, and you should always be. And that's what we want this book to be. We want you to find that light again, that identity and that hope, because there is hope on the other side.
Just take that in. I think you should rewind 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and no matter who you are, how you're listening, or what year you're coming from, what title you're coming from, just receive that affirmation. Rachel is such a gift and such a treasure, and she truly feels this way, encourages others all the time. It's just literally a gift.
I'm sure she'll be back. While we wait for Tamara to come back, you are free to ask any questions in the comments, and I would love to come back and answer them in any capacity that I can. We want hope to be spread. We want freedom to reign, and we don't want identity to be hidden any longer.
I think we're still live. And if that's the case, I want to end this strong. Rachel Rector's book is phenomenal. You've got to get your hands on it today. Behind the Hidden Doors by Rachel Rector, available on Amazon and in all bookstores to come. We are so excited to be her publisher, Fit and Faith Press. And Rachel, you rock. So if you guys didn't learn something from this, oh my gosh, you weren't listening. Clean your ears out and try again. All right. Love you guys.